Welcome back everyone to this particular pivot tables class. In this particular session, we're going to be covering everything that you need to know about pivot tables inside of Microsoft Excel. But before we actually get started, let us first answer this particular question. Now, what is a pivot table? A pivot table is a tool that we use in Excel to calculate, summarize, and analyze data. So you have to master pivot tables if you want to take your data analysis game to the next level. We shall straightforward go to the raw data that we would like to use to test ourselves on creating pivot tables. I'll just zoom in case you're not seeing the columns. So we have the regions, we also have the country, and we also have the item types that these people are dealing in. We have our sales channel. I can confirm how many they are. There are only 2, offline and online. Item types, how many do we have? I go through and check. We don't have any blanks. All this is done before you start doing the analysis. Also have the order priority, the order date. Yes, the date column is very critical. You need to check through. So for example, I can see I have transactions for a number of years since 2010. So this data set stretches from 2010 to 2017. So go through all of them and check through and confirm that your data set is good and proper to start analyzing. Okay, now the first thing, once you get that block of data, convert it into a table. I've already converted mine into a table. You can see when I click in, gives me the table design contextual tab, and I've called it sales underscore row underscore data. Now we're gonna be using this data to build pivot tables without writing any single formula. All right, how do we create a pivot table that looks like this? I can go to the worksheet that has the raw data, and I click anywhere and I say insert pivot table. I declare the existing worksheet where I want to create this particular report in this particular worksheet here, and confirm that I want to build my report in any of these cells. Okay, or if you don't do that, you can straightforward come over to the worksheet where you want to build the report, and then you come in here, click once, you say insert pivot table. It will still open the pivot table dialog box. I can say sales underscore row underscore data, and then I can say okay. You get your blank canvas and you can start building your report. Now when the pivot table field list opens, sometimes it will be on the sides here. You can move it, grab it and move it anywhere. It's a floating object, but of course by default it will be on the sides here. For me, I like to move it. I can expand, grow it, and get familiar with this particular pivot table area, because everything that we're going to be doing within a pivot table is done from this pivot table fields. So if you are not, this particular view is not good for you, you can actually come to this gear icon and change the view. I like to use this view. It's called field section and areas section side by side. But the default one is this one here, field section and areas section stacked. That is the default view. If you want to change, you can click in the gear icon and change. If I want field section and area section side by side, I can do this. Once I click here, you can see it changes the view. I have all the columns that are in my raw data visible to me. In the previous view, the first one, some of them were visible, some of them were cut off, but again, I can scroll here and look at all of them. So it depends on the view that works better for you. And because this is a drag and drop feature, this is a drag and drop tool, you don't need to write any formula. We have 4 areas where we can drag our fields. We have the filter area. We know what filters do. We have the column area. So you can drag your field in a column area. And when we do that, we shall see, or we shall observe the changes in our report. Or we can drag into the rows. Depends on how you want to build your report. And we also have this particular area where we drag the values. I like to work with this view here. So I'll just go with this view and I have all my areas visible to me. I can start building this report. This is a very simple report. We are just answering a question of sales revenue by region. So we want to see which region is performing the best. What I do is I will pick my region. I look for a column here which has the region. I either click on it. When I click on this column here that has region, this particular pivot table fields or Excel will look at the data type that is sitting in that column and determine automatically where to place it, either in the filters, the rows, the columns, or the values. It can do that automatically. It looks at the data type. So basically, when you have a column that has text, they will always be dropped into the rows. That's what I have seen. If you have a column that has numbers, they will always be dropped into the values. So I'll click on the region column here. I place a check mark. You see what happened? The region column was automatically dropped into the rows area. If you don't do that and you want to be sure that, you know what, I want to drag it into the rows, you grab it. When you click on the field name, you'll see your cursor changing into what we called a move cursor. We can use this move cursor to move things. I can grab this region field and move it into the rows. I just grab with my mouse and move it, drop it into the rows. Release my mouse and you can see my report starting to build here. Okay, I have this as a row label. Now I'm asked to drag the revenue column because I want to check how much each region is performing. Okay, I look for this column here called total revenue and drag it into the values. And before I drag, let me just tap on it. This revenue column has numbers in it. When I tap this, you see it is automatically dropped into the value area. So play around with these 4 areas. There are only 4 areas where you can drop your fields, and this is where pivot table picked their name. You can pivot, keep changing. I have dragged it here, I can change and drag it here. I can remove it here and drag it here. I can remove it here and drag it here. So I'm pivoting, I'm changing things. So that's where it picked its name. Okay, but you have to drag a field in an appropriate area. We are interested in dragging this into the value, so I'll bring it back here, okay, to normalize my report. And that's how simple we can build a pivot table report. I can close the pivot table field list here once I'm comfortable that the report I'm looking for is fine. But again, our interest is to make it look neat. Maybe our interest is to print it later on. Print it on a hard paper or add it in our PowerPoint presentation. So we need to beautify it. So let us do something that resembles this. I will click in the report. This is a pivot table report now. It's not a table, it is a pivot table report. You click anywhere in this table, you'll get 2 contextual tabs: pivot table analyze and the design tab. I'll click in and I go to the design tab. I can choose the pivot table styles here. Depending on the theme that you're working with, these particular styles will change. How do you configure the theme? You go to page layout. You go to themes and pick your theme according to your organization. When you pick a theme, it will give you specific fonts and it will give you specific color palettes. Okay, so you can configure one here, or you can pick from the predefined themes. So I'll just click in the table, come back to the design tab and pick from the existing pivot table styles. I can expand to see all of them. Pick which one is better. I can hover over and check. I'm interested in using this. I can go for this and test. Some people like this colorful report. I can test this one here, but let us choose this one here. I go in the medium option here and I choose pivot table style medium 2. I click that. You can see now I'm getting this format. I can change the row labels here. I can double click and change this one to show as region and enter. And I can also change this particular automatic heading. Whenever you drop something into the field list here, depending on what is happening, if it is summing up, so it says sum of the column name that you dropped in. If it was, maybe we dropped in total profit, it will be sum of total profit. That is the default column naming with pivot tables, but you can change it. Okay, you can double tap and change it from here, from value field settings, or you can actually click and start typing straightforward. Okay, so I can say this is gonna be revenue, and I can also add the dollar symbol in there, in the enter. Okay, Make sure that the name that you're giving here for your column headers of your pivot table report are not existing inside your raw data. You have to confirm that when I check in the raw data. If I try to give a column name that is maybe total revenue, it will not accept, because this column naming is already in my raw data that I'm using. And as simple as that, we have answered that particular question. So that is the best way of how we can use pivot tables. I can click in my report and come back to pivot table analyze to bring back my field list. Now, within these areas, it doesn't mean that you only drag one column. You can drag multiple fields in one area, or you can have the same field name dragged in one area multiple times. So if I wanted to drag this revenue column one more time into this particular report, I could come and grab it one more time and drag it the second time here. It will still accept. So when I drag this same column for the second time here, I can change the way how it calculates. By default, it is summing up. How do we change this? We can click on the column, and then this will launch the value field settings option here. Once you click value field settings, it will open this dialog box, and you'll see under the summarize value field by, it is defaulting to summation. What I will do, I want the count of transactions. I will say count, and you can see the custom name here will change, count of total revenue, and I will say okay. And there you go. You can see now this one changes the calculation. Remember, we said pivot tables can do calculations and summarize numbers. So I can change this heading to count of transactions and enter. So what I wanted to show here is that a column can be dragged several times into an area here. Now, sometimes I've seen people who are coming to pivot tables for the first time. When they are building their reports, they tend to format these numbers wrongly. When it comes to pivot tables, their formats are unique. So we don't format like this. If I wanted 1000 separator here in these numbers, I don't highlight like this and come back to the home tab and use the format. The formats that we have here, the number formats. We don't do this in pivot tables, because if you do it and you drag in another field, the report will change and your format will be gone. So how do we do it? I have to click in the table, right mouse click, and then I choose either number format from here, or you can right mouse click and go to value field settings to be sure, and then you say number format. So I can go for number and then use 1000 separator. I don't want decimal places, and then I say okay. I say okay again. Now, even if I dragged in another column here or dragged in another field, all the format will be maintained. Now let us look at subtotals. Okay, when we build a report like this, it will show us some subtotals. How do we turn them on and off? Why? Because the totals can give you a wrong impression on the chart, because these are big numbers. We'd like to turn them on and off. How do we do that? You click in your report, go to design. We have a button for subtotals. So we can click in the drop down here, and then we have more options showing up. Do not show subtotals. I can do that. When I click here, the subtotals will go. Or I can come back to subtotals and say, show all subtotals at the bottom of the group. There you go. After the end of each category, they show you the subtotal. Or I can say show subtotals at the top, which is the default behavior. So it depends on what really works for you. Similarly, we also have grand totals that we can turn on and off. So these two subtotals added up together, they give us this grand total. So we have a dedicated layout here, can turn them on and off. Can say on for rows only. There you go. Can see the grand totals are gone away. I can come back here and say on for rows and columns, they come back. So feel free to check the layouts here. Similarly, if for example you want breathing space every after these subtotals, maybe if these subtotals were showing below, let me just say at the bottom, and maybe we want breathing space just immediately after the subtotal, we can say insert blank line after each item, like so. Now we also have the report layout option here. By default, it will show in compact form. I can maybe say outline form. You see, if this report works better for you, no problem. You can go with that. Maybe I say show in tabular form like this, or I can say repeat all item labels. This works when you are either in tabular form or outline form. So if I say repeat all item labels like so, you can see the mode here. Just to fill this gap, they have been repeated. Or I can say do not repeat item labels, and they are gone. So you can play around with the layouts here, as well as the pivot table style options here. If I wanted to know how many transactions form up this figure here in the offline mode for this particular region, right mouse click and then you say show details. What this one does is that it creates another worksheet with only transactions that contribute to that block figure. The other method is just to come over to the number and then you double click on it. If you don't go the other route of right mouse clicking, you can just double tap and then it will show you all the transactions that contribute to that figure. Now, I'd already mentioned that in case you had blanks like we do have here, this is our report that we have generated. We have the region and the sales amount, but we have a region that has not made any sales. Maybe we shall build this report from scratch so that we can replace those blank cells together. So let me just come here and say insert. I create a pivot table from our raw data cells underscore raw underscore data. Then say okay. Can build this same report together. So what I will do, I will drag the region column into the rows, and I'll also drag our sales values or our revenue column into the value field area like so. So this one gives us these numbers in our pivot table report. Here we didn't make anything, it's just a 0. There is a setting you need to turn on. So you click in your report and then you come over to pivot table options here, and then you click in the options to open the pivot table options dialog box. Okay, now you'll see under the layout and format, you see this option here for empty cells. Show what? I can say show 0 and then say okay, and there you go. Now you can see where there is no sales or no revenue, you can see we are getting a 0 here. How about showing items with no data? For example, in this report, I'm going to be building this from scratch. Very fast. Insert pivot table sales underscore raw data. And this report, we drag our region into the rows. Yes, we can drag our order priority column into the rows one more time. So let us bring in our numbers here. So you can see in Australia and Oceania, we have cancelled high, low, and medium. But in Asia, we have cancelled high and medium. So there is no low in Asia. We'd like to show it even if it has nothing. When I click in any of these options and come to field settings here, you see it opens up the subtotals and filters as well as layout and print here. So let's turn this one on, then say okay. You see, now we can see low is showing up here in inside Asia, even though there was no any value. So we can come in here and then go to pivot table options for empty cells. Show what? 0. Then I say okay, and there you go. Let us look at grouping text. For example, you have generated your report that looks like this. Let us regenerate this report from scratch. I'll say insert pivot table. I'm going to be dropping the item type into the rows, and this one gives me all the item types that we have in our table. And I also drop into the values area here, our total revenue column. Now, if I wanted to group these items, I can do that. So maybe I want to look up for items that I can group as food items, and then the rest I can group them as other items. So what you do, you tap on the items you want to group. So for example, baby food, beverages, you hold control on your keyboard and tap on the item. Fruits, meat, and maybe vegetables as well. And let's also add in the snacks. Now I wanted to group those items that I have selected into a group called food items. So I right mouse click and then I say group, and now it will create those groups for me. What I need is to just rename these groups. For example, group 1, that is a generic name that you will get after you group your text. Now you can come in here and rename it. Maybe this one will be, I can call this one food items only. Let me just add that and enter. Now all these items are under this particular category, which we have just created within the pivot table report itself. It was not initially in our raw data. We are just adding this inside the pivot table report. Now, the rest of these items, I can actually highlight all of them like so, and then you say group all of them. So they get their group 2, which we can rename to other items, and enter. So immediately you do that, you can see your sub items inside a group that you have just created. Now there's also grouping numbers. Let's assume that you have a report like this. Maybe I want to see units sold between 1 and 1,000. How much in revenue are they bringing in? So let us rebuild this report together. This will be sales underscore row underscore data. I can drop in the column that has our units sold. I right mouse click and say group. Since these are numbers, I will get a different dialog box popping up here. So this one, it gives you by default according to the range, what is the minimum and the maximum. You just need to give it, I should create buckets that increase by how much? We can say by 1,000. But let us accept this particular setting that we have here and say, okay, we are starting from 2 ending at 10,000 as the maximum value, and we want to create groups of 1,000. Say okay. Let us see how many groups we get. You see, we have some blanks. Of course, we shall filter those ones out, and we can see we are starting from 2 here. Maybe I can say start from 1 just to be sure. Maybe in future there could be an order of only 1 unit. So I'll just go back to grouping, and then I say 1, and then say okay. So 1 to 1,000, 1,001 to 200. So anything that is below 1 or 0 will be eliminated here with a simple filter, which I can activate and filter out this particular first row, and then say okay. Now I have my buckets that I'm interested in. I want to know how much each individual group is making. Okay, I can drag my revenue column into the value area. So that's how you can group numbers. By default, when you actually work with a date column inside the pivot table report, when I click in this particular report and drag, maybe I'll come back to the field list here and drag in my date column, I can say order date and drag it into the rows. What this one does is that by default, it will group the date values for you. If you want to ungroup, you can see here it has created the quarters automatically for us, the month automatically for us, as well as the date. If I expand here, if I double click to expand, you can see the quarters has a grouping that has been added automatically. I can go ahead and double click again. You can see the month. That's another grouping that has been created automatically. If I double click in end of the month, you can now see the individual date values. So by default, when you drag a date value into any of these areas, it will be grouped for you, either by quarters, by month, by days, by hours, and so on and so forth. Now, if I wanted to ungroup, I can drag or I can remove any of these groups from the field here. Maybe I don't want the years, I can drag them out. I don't want the month, I can drag them out. I don't want the quarters, I can drag them out. Now I can see only the date values. So these are the individual days of each particular month. If I wanted to group, I can right mouse click my date value inside my report and then come over to group. Because by default, you can see it groups into years, quarters, and months. I can turn these ones off and choose any of my choice. Maybe I'm interested in only the month. I can do that, month, and say okay. So what this one does is that it will show me only month Jan up to December. The figure that we have here is for Jan 2010, Jan 2011, 12, 13, 14, up to 17. If you wanted to look at each individual year, then what you can do, you can come back to your grouping, right mouse click, group, and you can also turn on the year option. So I'll go for years and then say okay. When I do that, I will get the year as well as the month. So how do you turn on a setting that will help you make sure that every time you open a file, it refreshes your pivot table reports and checks your new data that has come in. How do you turn that one on? You click in your report, come back to pivot table options. On the data tab, when you open the pivot table option, it has the layout and format, printing, data, tools and filters, alt text, and also display. Now we're going to be coming over to the data tab. Then the setting that we're interested in is this one here. Refresh data when opening the file. And then you say okay. From now on, whenever you open this workbook, data will also be refreshed. So you say okay, and there you go. Now if I close and open again, I don't need to hit the refresh button. Everything will be refreshed for me automatically. Now, if I wanted to create separate pivot tables for online and offline mode, I can do that with a simple setting, which we called show filter report pages. You click in your report, you must have a filter here. If you do not have the filter, it will not work. So you come over to pivot table options here. If you just click in the drop down, it will show you options, show report filter pages, and also get pivot data formula. Now let us do this. Click in here and it will show us the particular field we are using inside our filters, which is sales channel. What I need to do here is to say okay. Immediately I do that, what happens is that it will create these particular worksheets for me. If you had a filter that had 5 items in there, you will get 5 separate pivot table reports on 5 different worksheets. It is impossible to have 2 filters running at the same time inside one column. So if I wanted maybe to say label filters and say contains, I want to filter any value inside the region filter that contains Africa. That's the example I want to use, and say okay. You can see this pivot table report has now been filtered, showing me only regions that have the word Africa in them. Middle East and North Africa, South Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, if I wanted to activate another filter that shows me maybe I want to say filter on any value that is greater than 2 million. If I turn on that particular filter and say okay, if I do that, you can see my first filter is gone, and I can see it's now filtering by values, but again it is not filtering the label that I had filtered. That one has been eliminated. How do we turn this setting that will give us capacity to filter on multiple values? So if I come over to pivot table analyze, pivot table options, I can check through the settings that we have here. Let's go to totals and filters, allow multiple filters per field. If I turn this one on and say okay, that is the only setting I need to do multiple filters on one field. I'll say okay. And now let us go back to our table and see if those 2 filters can be turned on. I'll come back here. We are just filtering based on values greater than 2 million, which is fine. These are the regions that have figures greater than 2 million. Now, I would also want to see regions that have the word Africa in them. So I'll come to label filters, say contains, and then I'll say Africa. And let me just use small letters. Maybe this is case sensitive. And then I say, okay, there you go. Maybe I can go back and change this criteria. I can say greater than 3 billion. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think a billion is 9. So I'll say okay, and there you go. These numbers were in billions. I was just mistaken to read them as millions. Now you can see I have 2 filters at the same time. Label filters, value filters. That is something that was not possible without turning on that simple setting. And now if I wanted to refer to any report here, maybe I wanted to refer to this particular report and pick a value in B4, I'll say equals, and then I tap this one here. You see what it gives me in the formula? So if this is annoying on your side, you can turn it on and off, coming over to the file menu, more options, and turn it off from the formulas tab here. If we did turn off these 2 settings here and say okay, and maybe I want to refer any of these cells, I can say equals and tap this particular cell. You see, now it is giving us our normal cell addresses. Autofit column width on update. Yes, this is an annoying kind of behavior. So right now, if I check this particular width, column width, this is 37.36. If I check this particular one, is 21.55. Now let us refresh this report. I just right mouse click and say refresh. There you go. You can see now these columns have changed. If I check the width right now, column width, right now it is 29.7, and this one which was 25, it's now 13. So if you want to avoid that annoying behavior, go to pivot table analyze option, and then you go to options, layout and format right here. You can see these are the options that we want to turn on and off. Autofit column width on update. Please just turn on this one here and then say okay. Now let us adjust our columns to any width. I will just adjust this one to any width of my choice. And now if I refresh this report, you see nothing happens with my column width. All right, so let us go to some calculations here. There's a calculation that we always do in pivot tables called percentage of grand total. Displays the values as a percentage of the grand total of all the values or data points in the entire report. For example, in this report, you can see our grand total is 19 billion. If I wanted to know the percentage contribution for each region, how do I do that? All right, so let us rebuild this report together. I'll come back here and say insert a pivot table report, and I'll say sales underscore row underscore data and enter. Now let us build this report here. I'll drag the region into the rows, and I'll drag my revenue right here. And what I will do is to rename this particular column region, and this is gonna be revenue. Let us format our report to look a little bit professional. Use a 1000 separator, no decimals. Now this is our simple report. I can come over to the design and change the layout. Maybe I pick this layout right there. Now how do we calculate the percentage based on this particular total? You come back to your pivot table analyze, field list, and we drag the revenue column one more time into the value area here. So I'll drag this one more time. Remember, I did tell you that you can drag a column or a field in these areas a number of times. Okay, so these are the numbers. Now to convert them into percentages, it's quite very simple. What you do, you can right mouse click, and then you'll see an option here called show values as. Percentage of grand total is the option I'll pick, like so, and there you go. I'll get my percentage calculated very, very fast. If I don't do that, I'll just Control Z. I'll just rename this column to percent of grand total and enter. Now, if I actually don't right mouse click and say show value as, come to field settings, this dialog box will launch. And now what you can do is to go to show value as. The default will be no calculation. I can come in the drop down and choose percentage of grand total right here. When I do that and say okay, this will give me the percentage contribution for each number, comparing it with the grand totals that we have here. All right, so let us move forward and look at another calculation here. Percentage of column total. For example, I have this report here, which I will reconstruct with you from scratch. Pivot table, sales underscore row data, and enter. Now I'm gonna be dropping the region definitely into the rows, and I also drop the sales channel into the columns like so. And I'll now bring in my total revenue into the values. Now we want to show percentage of column total. What is the percentage of this value on comparing it with this total that we have here? What is the percentage of this figure comparing it with the total that we have here, as well as the percentage of this particular value comparing it with the grand totals? That's what we mean with percentage of column total. So it displays the values on each column as a percentage of the grand total for each of the columns or series in your report. So let us do that. What we do, I click in the report field list, and then I will drag this column again into the value area. What I need to do is to click in this particular second column that I've dragged or the second field, and then I come over to value field settings. I'll call this one from here percentage of column total. Now I need to come and say show values as, and then in the drop down, I'll go for percentage of column total. I hit the OK button, and there you go. So that's how we turn on the percentage of column total. Similarly, we can do the opposite, the percentage of row total. So let us come over to this particular worksheet. So I'll say insert pivot table, sales underscore row underscore data, enter. So I'm gonna be using the region, the sales channel into the columns, total revenue into the values. Now our interest is to generate the percentage of row total. If I came over to the design tab of my report, I can come over to grand totals and turn on any of these ones that I don't want. Maybe I can say off for rows and columns. Once I do that, all our grand totals will go. Now, if I wanted to bring back only the row total, what do? I come to grand totals, on for rows only. So I tap this option here, and this grand total will show right here. Now, if I wanted the percentage, I can come back to the pivot table, analyze, field list, drag the revenue one more time into the value area, click in here, value field settings, rename my column to percentage of row total, and then I say show values as. The default is no calculation, but our interest is to do percentage of row total. And then I'll say okay, and there you go. So I'll come here and rebuild this report with you from scratch. I'll say insert pivot table. I'll say sales underscore row underscore data, and enter. Now I'm gonna be dragging my year column into the rows. So I have 2010 up to 2017. Now I'll bring in my revenues like so. So this is how we perform. If we got 2,258,000,000, and in 2011 we got 2,637,000,000, what was the percentage increase or the percentage decrease? I can drag my revenue column one more time into the value area, and now in here I can click value field settings. Maybe I rename this to previous year performance, and the calculation here will be percentage of, and we are going to be using the year column, and in here we are going to be using the best item as previous, because we're going to be comparing performance based on the previous period. So you read this show values as percentage of previous year, and then you say okay. Immediately you do that, you can see how we performed.
Now let us move forward and look at more advanced pivot table calculations. The only thing that you need to do is to continue watching this video that is showing somewhere on your screen right here, or you can actually watch this video that is showing somewhere right here if you'd like to take your data analysis skills to the next level. See you in any of these videos. Bye-bye.